So Constitutional Law 2 mainly discusses the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights is a declaration and enumeration of a person's fundamental civil and political rights. When you say civil rights, these are rights that belong to an individual by virtue of his citizenship in a state or community. When you say political rights, these are rights that pertain to an individual's citizenship vis-a-vis the management of the government. Of course, there are also social and economic rights, which are rights which are intended to ensure the well-being and economic security of the individual. We also have rights of the accused, which are civil rights intended for the protection of a person accused of any crime. Basically, the Bill of Rights, it is invoked against the government. It governs the relationship between the individual citizen and the state. It does not concern itself with the relationship between individuals or between private individual and other individuals. What the Bill of Rights does is to declare some forbidden zones in the private sphere that is inaccessible to any power holder. So we all know that the government has sovereignty because it is the machinery of the state. Of course, the state is sovereign. The government is one of the instrumentalities of the state. Therefore, the government has access to certain powers and machineries that any private individual cannot have access to. So, for example, the government or the state through the government can exercise police power, which is very broad, power to tax, and power of eminent domain. So, if you compare it to a private individual, it seems that the private individual is helpless against the government. That is why we have the Bill of Rights to sort of balance the scales and to ensure that there is justice and fairness in the administration of the government, and that the primary purpose of the state, which is to protect its people, protect the freedoms of its people, and the very reason why the state was constituted, that's the purpose of the Bill of Rights, sort of to limit the power of the government in order for abuses to be avoided, or to those who are given the power or authority to wield it with caution. So in a democracy, the preservation and enhancement of the dignity and worth of human personality is a central core, as well as a cardinal article of our faith of our civilization, and the inviolable character of man as an individual must be protected to the largest possible extent in his thoughts, his beliefs, as a citadel of his person. And the provisions of the Bill of Rights are self-executing, meaning it does not need an enabling law or enabling legislation. It may be invoked. A citizen may directly invoke the provisions of the Bill of Rights in the 1987 Constitution. A person need not wait for Congress to create or pass a law protecting certain freedoms and rights that are embodied in the Bill of Rights. It is recognized that legislation is unnecessary to enable courts to effectuate constitutional provisions guaranteeing the fundamental rights of life, liberty, and the protection of property of persons. So, basically, civil rights of an individual by virtue of him being a citizen of the state. Political rights is right to vote, right to suffrage, right to to participate in the elections. Those are political rights. Your other similar rights, social and economic rights, your right to labor, your right to security of tenure. Okay, your rights basically that are protected because your employment is also an economic right. That's an example. So we also have social legislation actually by virtue of the labor code, but again, when you invoke provisions of the labor code, it's usually invoked by a person against the employer, against another individual or entity. But if we're talking about the Bill of Rights, one invokes it against the government. Rights of the accused, in if a crime is committed, well, a crime is any act or omission punishable by law. So any act really that is declared by law as a crime, that's considered as a felony. So the state may prosecute such person if such person commits an act or an omission that is declared as a crime by the state. So it seems like it's a very great power, and that the citizens are helpless, right? That's why the Bill of Rights is very important, because it affords the accused certain civil rights so that he may be protected, and to ensure that he will not be prosecuted unfairly. Okay, so more on this later. Application to private individuals. The Bill of Rights cannot be invoked against acts of private individuals. Again, it's different. If another private individual has wronged you, you invoke your rights protected under civil law. But the Bill of Rights, it's invoked against the government. The equal protection erects no shield against private conduct, however discriminatory or wrongful. Constitutional protection applies to government action, and is meant as a restraint against sovereign authority. So the Bill of Rights is not meant to be invoked against private individuals, and it governs, again, ulit-ulit, relations between individuals and the state, because it's very important. Because some people mistake the Bill of Rights as like rights that they can invoke against anyone. So no, it's only against the government. We have the civil code for in case a person suffers damage or injury by virtue of an act of another person, and we have criminal law if a person commits an act or omission that is punishable by law. So private acts, the principle that the Bill of Rights applies only to actions taken by state officials, does not necessarily mean that a private individual cannot violate the liberty of another. So violation of the Bill of Rights, precisely as a constitutional guarantee, can be done only by public officials. So yes, it can be invoked against a private individual, but only if such private individual is a public official, acting in his private capacity and violating the liberties of another that are protected under the Bill of Rights. Almost all of these liberties are also guaranteed in Article 32 of the Civil Code, thus making private violations actionable even if violation does not have constitutional consequence. So there are violations, or there are rights that are protected under the Bill of Rights that are also protected under the Civil Code. So it's a matter of which provision to invoke against who. So the propriety thereof. So yung sinasabi dito, if a public official violates a certain right protected under the Bill of Rights, then the Bill of Rights may be invoked against that private individual. Such private individual is a public official acting in official capacity, but also has the option to invoke provisions of the Civil Code against such public officer, so that the public officer may be liable for the injury or damage caused